Today, I want to talk about the outbreak of the American Civil War. A couple events that really are what we would call the breaking points that is going to lead our country into the bloodiest conflict that we've ever been a part of. Um, to do this, I'm going to use a couple documents that are linked on our Canvas page. I've got a few other documents open in tabs that I might put here later. But the first document is this one here that's called Two Views of John Brown. Um, and really, the beginning of this discussion comes with something known as John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. As I said in the last lecture, John Brown was a radical, violent abolitionist. He felt that slavery was a moral evil, and that any means necessary to overthrow or to end that moral evil was justified. So he was willing to use violence to end violence, so to speak. He sees himself as commanded by God. There's a religious component to his beliefs. And in 1859, October, his sons, and a gang of supporters are going to storm what is called the arsenal, the federal arsenal of weapons at Harper's Ferry, Virginia. The plan was break into the arsenal, steal the weapons, get out of the arsenal, distribute those weapons to neighboring slave communities, and to start a slave insurrection, violently overthrowing the Southern planters. This is a radical idea. It's outlandish to think that this could have worked. Him and his sons, they break into the arsenal, they get the guns, but then they are immediately surrounded, and there's a gunfight, and many are killed. John Brown is wounded. He is then arrested in October of 1859. These two sources, it says two views of John Brown. I like to read these in class usually, but the one is from the Cincinnati Enquirer, a Democratic newspaper. Now, Ohio is a free state, but this is a Democratic paper. We're right there next to the slaveholding state of Kentucky, and they're going to give the negative view of John Brown. They say they call him Osawatomie Brown, which is a negative name based on the violence he did in Kansas. They ridicule Republican abolitionist politicians, Seward and Chase, and they say the danger of having a Republican abolition president can now be readily appreciated. So, they're seeing the coming of Abraham Lincoln, and this group, they call John Brown reckless, and they stand ready to deluge the land in blood. So definitely read through this. This is the Southern perspective of John Brown. This one here, New York Tribune, this is a Republican paper, and in this they will frown upon John Brown. They'll say that he did wrong things, but they refer to him as Old Brown. Old Brown here. They dared and died for what they felt to be the right, though in a manner which seems to us fatally wrong. This perspective is saying, look, John Brown did something crazy, but at least he's on the right side of the slave issue. And this one is a much more measured or moderate portrayal of John Brown. The catch is this is taking place in the fall before an election year. By December, John Brown will be found guilty of treason and insurrection and will be publicly hanged. And the hanging, the violence of John Brown, and then the hanging and the death penalty that was given him finally and further divides the American populace, much like what we were talking about with the other events of the 1850s. For most, John Brown, where is that? I want to find some pictures. At most, John Brown was either a murderer, kind of here, wild-eyed, fanatical, sees himself as divine, or he was a martyr, solemn, dignified, protecting African Americans and their children, trying to bring an end to tyrants. John Brown was either a, a freedom fighter or a terrorist, a murderer or a martyr. And he kind of symbolizes this final divide that had polarized our country for our entire existence, but especially in the 1850s. It's with this backdrop in 1860 that we're going to have a presidential election. And I'm going to bring up the election of 1860 electoral map here. This is the election of Abraham Lincoln. Um, and what you'll notice is in 1860, the country was so polarized, and there are people in the middle, that we actually have four presidential candidates. We have the Republican candidate, which will be Lincoln. The Democratic Party will actually split into Southern Democrats and Northern Democrats. And then there will actually be a fourth party, a compromise, what they called the Constitutional Union Party. This kind of pops up right at the end, before the election, trying to provide an alternative to just pro-slavery, anti-slavery. You'll look at this. Lincoln is going to win the popular vote, somewhat close. He's going to win the electoral vote pretty largely. But there's more to this story than just what you see here. Look at the breakdown of the states. Abraham Lincoln wins the presidency by winning every single northern state. These states here, Maryland, Virginia, Kentucky, Missouri, these are slave-holding states. So if you were a slave-holding state in the South or right on the border, you did not vote for Lincoln. Lincoln did not get a single electoral vote from a slave-holding state. In fact, in most of these southern states, because states control election laws, Abraham Lincoln wasn't even on the ballot. So not only did he not get an electoral vote from down here, he didn't get a popular vote down here. All of Lincoln's popular votes and all of his electoral votes comes from the northern states. This just shows how divided our country was. In the South, Breckinridge is the Southern Democratic candidate. He carries most of the Deep South. Douglas, who gets the second most popular votes, gets hardly any states. He gets Illinois, and he gets a fraction, I believe, over here, it's hard to see, of New Jersey. He gets the second most. In other words, he was second to Lincoln in these northern states. He was second to Douglas down here. He was nearly the most popular candidate, but only gets 12 electoral votes. Here's where this really gets interesting. I'm going to click over to Wikipedia and show you some of these numbers. So Abraham Lincoln, 180 electoral votes, popular vote, but look at it as a percentage. Lincoln won the presidency with only 39.8% of the popular vote. To my knowledge, this is the lowest that a president has ever won the presidency with. And if you look at Douglas, 30%, Breckinridge, 18%. So that's 48% right there that are essentially okay or in favor of slavery. Almost 50% of our country voted in 1860 in favor or okay with slavery. Maybe more than that if you include John Bell. In other words, Lincoln is a minority president, meaning that he does not have a mandate of the people. He does not have the support for his views of most of the people in our country. In fact, southern states like South Carolina said, if Abraham Lincoln is elected without Southern support, this is essentially the same as the tyranny of King George III had over the colonies. That, back then, the phrase "no taxation without representation," the southern states are saying, look, we would then have a president who is not representing us in any way, shape, or form. And South Carolina threatened before Lincoln's election to secede. They said, if he's elected in November, we will leave the Union. Lincoln is elected, and in December, South Carolina becomes the first state to break away and declare secession from the United States of America. Now, this raises the question, like that was raised back in the Jackson years with the nullification: can a state secede? Is that constitutionally allowed? James Buchanan, the lame duck outgoing president, says, no, you're not allowed to leave constitutionally, but also no, as executive, I'm not allowed to do anything about it. In other words, as a lame duck president, he said, my hands are tied. I can't do anything. Personally, I believe James Buchanan is the worst president in American history. He was elected president to preserve, protect, and defend the United States of America. And when we tried to break apart, he said, I can't do anything. Abraham Lincoln, when he comes into office in 1860, will say, I will preserve the Union. South Carolina is the first state to declare secession. By February of 1860, 6 more states have joined South Carolina. So you now have 7 states in secession. When Abraham Lincoln stands up to give his inaugural address, he's essentially giving a speech to a country, 7 states of which say, screw you, you're not our president, we're out of here. What's interesting about this, and this is very important, the cause of the Civil War is secession. Indirectly, it's slavery, and we all kind of know that. And Lincoln, in another speech later on, he'll say, we'll all know that slavery somehow was the cause of the Civil War. But the real issue that broke our country apart and brought us to fighting is the issue of secession. Now, and again, secession was in response to slavery. If you look at Abraham Lincoln's inaugural address, some of the things he says here in this first paragraph, he says, I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. In Lincoln's inaugural address, he is saying to Southern states who are in secession, I am not going to abolish slavery. I am not inclined to do so, and I am not legally allowed to do. What he goes on to say, and we'll talk more about this in the next unit, is I am bound to preserve the Union. And so really getting that as the cause of the Civil War, that it was secession and preservation of the Union, which is what is going to bring us to fighting, and slavery only as an indirect cause, is very important. And I think it's important to tie all that back in to the election of 1860, the electoral votes, the popular vote, and the fact that Lincoln only had 39.8% of the vote. All right, this is the last lecture for Unit 5.1. It brings us right up to the breaking point of Civil War. Unit 5.2 will be about the Civil War and its aftermath, and so we'll try to do that before the semester is over. Thanks for listening. If you have questions, definitely please leave them. See you.